Hi, guys, and welcome to Charade Inc. I'm Dell, and I'm here with Patrick. Patrick is a trained actor, award winning public speaker, and a former morning radio show host. He has a YouTube channel and a podcast called True Gay Crime, a podcast covering true crime stories involving LGBTQ2 plus crimes and criminals. Hi, Patrick. Can you tell us more about the origins of True Gay Crime?
Oh my God, my pleasure. First of all, may I say, because this is crime, corruption, and cocktails, that I have a cocktail.
Oh,
Do you have a
see,
cocktail?
I did not bring one today, but I always
No!
keep one on the side, right off camera, because I always keep a daiquiri in my handy dandy cup. We have to be able to conceal and spill.
We
So
do.
I'm also,
Cheers to you, my friend.
cheers.
Cheers. I love
I'm
that
gonna
you guys
try.
start the podcast with a cocktail and you say what you're drinking. This is a dirty gin martini, which is my favorite.
Listen, I love a good martini. I love a good margarita. I am a rum person, and so daiquiri is always my off-camera go-to
Yeah.
if I need to have one. Nothing better than a very nice strawberry daiquiri at the end of the
Ooh,
day.
delicious. Okay, so back to my podcast. So, True Gay Crime, how was that born? Well, it was kind of born out of the fact that during COVID, I was laid off from my hotel job because the hotel industry just flatlined. So I had time on my hands. I grew up the type of household where at Christmas you would watch scary movies instead of Christmas movies. So I've always been surrounded by like stalking and death and just kind of like scary and creepy and crawly and everything. Halloween is my favorite holiday, etc. So the true crime genre, which is relatively new in terms of human existence. I mean, I know that I did a recent podcast on Truman Capote, who came out with his book in the 1963, I believe. And it was a true crime book. And it was kind of one of the first ones that kind of put true crime. People were like, oh, we can talk about these crimes they're real and they happen. And we're going to talk about them because there's a lot to unpack in these episodes. It's not all cut and dry. It's the police don't always do their job and people don't always get the justice that they deserve and et cetera.
Exactly.
So that was an easy segue for me where I was like, this true crime stuff. And I was the morning radio show host on an LGBTQ plus radio station here in Toronto. So I have a lot of experience with microphones and being on air and everything. So the thought of starting a podcast and then marrying that with the true crime genre, I was like, And then I thought, well, you're a big gay, so let's niche it down and make it about true, because there's a lot of true crime podcasts. Let's be honest.
Yes.
I'm like, Patrick, you got to niche down, dude. So I was like, oh, well, let's make it a gay one. And at first I thought, well, I don't know if there's going to be that much gay crime. I mean, hate crimes aside, for me, there's two kinds. It's kind of, there's two buckets for gay crime. And there's hate crimes, which I find very difficult to cover, which are extremely important in terms of, bringing a voice to the victims and highlighting these types of crimes because they're awful. And they're a lot harder for me to do stories on because it's a lot more emotional. But then there's and not to discount the victims of crimes where the serial killer, for example, is gay. Obviously, that crime is just as awful. But for me, it's a different dynamic when the killer is gay and he's attacking. I say he because it's usually he, but there are females too, where their victims are gay. So it's been a fascinating journey, a learning experience for me. I've learned a lot about legal things and how the justice system works, and just from the research and whatever. So it's been fascinating and it's had good reception, and I'm so happy to be here and sharing, with you on this topic. I wouldn't know you otherwise if I didn't have this podcast, so.
Yeah, definitely podcast brings people together, especially when you add on the layer of COVID and the people that got into podcasting because of it. It was the same thing for me and my co-host where, it was in the middle of COVID. We had talked about it all the time with each other and we were like, you know what, let's just record us in our like normal conversations that we would have with each other.
Yeah.
Then I was like, you know what? I want to talk to other people in the same space as me, in the same podcast, corruptions, crime, conspiracies, because that's what I love to talk about and I love to connect with people. And so I was so happy when we were able to connect and get this schedule, because I was like, yes, this is the type of energy that I want, and this is the type of collaboration that we need, because a lot of times in true crime we stay in our like niche areas
Hmm.
and there's not a lot of blending of the two.
Yeah, that's true.
So what we're going to talk about today is the gay and trans panic defense.
Mm.
And just to give you a bit of a background, members of the LGBTQ community are often victims of hate crimes. Sexual orientation and gender identity rank as the third highest motivator of hate crimes behind race and religion. And over the course of a lesbian, gay, or bisexual person's lifetime, there is a 1 in 5 chance that they will experience a hate crime, and it's 1 in 4 for a transgender person. And unfortunately, when people attack members of the LGBTQ community, they often use what is termed as the gay or trans panic defense. And it has been defined by the LGBT bar as, quote, a legal strategy which asks a jury to find that a victim's sexual orientation or gender identity is to blame for the defendant's violent reaction, including murder, end quote. So, Patrick, I just want to start with, what are your overall thoughts on the gay and trans panic defense?
Well, first of all, I want to say those statistics are so alarming and depressing, and it shows how much work we have to do. I live in a bubble in Canada, and specifically in Toronto, the bigger cities where it's very liberal. You see all colors, genders, religions, races, hand in hand, walking. I'm not saying it's a utopian society, but I live in a bubble, and it's easy to forget how much work still needs to be done. So thank you for the statistics, because they're terrible. For me, I mean, and thank you for that great introduction about what it is, because I read about exactly the terms and stuff, but I didn't memorize anything. So I was like, oh my god, I hope she says what it is. But of course, I know the why it exists, and it's just homophobia, it's just transphobia, it's just hate, it's just there's zero excuse for something like this to be existing, and in many countries it doesn't exist. I know in the United Kingdom they don't have it. They were like, what are you talking about? This is stupid. They were like, are you fucking kidding me? This is ridiculous. It just doesn't make any sense. So but I know in the US they have used it many times. Even in New Zealand, who we look at that as a forward thinking country, is just they've used it as well. And the fact that you can go to court and say that it's because somebody was gay that you were able to beat them to death is so shocking that would even be exist as an argument. That, I mean, it occurred to me, so over the centuries, since the dawn of time, how many women, heterosexual or cisgender women, have been harassed by heterosexual cisgender men, right? In clubs, in bars, on the street. And imagine a woman was able to pull out a gun, or if she, was able to overpower a man and kill that man, and then go to court and be like, well, he was hollering at me, and he was, women don't have that. Cisgendered women don't have that right, because it's a cisgender heterosexual man's world that they've created, where it's okay for them to do exactly the same thing to women every single day. And women just have to put up with it, right? But
Right.
the tables are turned now. Oh my God, what? A gay man is whistling at me, or makes a comment at me, or has the nerve to come up to me and say that he finds me attractive. Well, I'm just going to beat the shit out of him and kill him. Like, it makes zero sense. It gives all the power to the same people that already have the power. It's revolting. And the fact that there are stories where they've gone to the courts and they were able to reduce their sentences from first degree murder to manslaughter and just get less time is
Yeah,
shocking.
yeah, and we're actually going to get into some cases where they were acquitted, unfortunately. So,
Oof.
we're going to talk about it a little later, but this defense actually has a 32% success rate in getting someone acquitted, and a bit higher in having a reduction in sentence. And the fact that it's even that high shows that we have so many different problems in our criminal justice system. A lot of the focus is on the racial disparities, which are real and we need to talk about, but there's also who can use this defense. This defense is mainly for cisgender straight white men to use. That is the group that use it. That is the group that is successful with using it, both with the gay panic defense and the trans panic defense. Um, but I want to take you back to the first case that really brought this into the American consciousness. And that is sadly the case of Matthew Shepard. For those that don't know, Matthew was beaten by two assailants, Aaron McKinley and Russell Henderson. They pistol whipped him with a gun and they tied him to a fence in freezing conditions and then set him on fire before leaving him to die. And they both attempted to use the gay panic defense. But luckily, this was a case of it being unsuccessful, and both were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. What are your thoughts on this case? And what was the first time you really looked at this case deeply?
Well, I mean, I think as a gay person growing up, you hear about that. That was a turning point for a lot of people in terms of, oh, this brought the idea of what a hate crime was to the main stage. Unfortunately, it's always been there, but I guess it takes one instance, and for whatever reason, it's a turning point where it gets the attention that it deserves, or at least, the visibility, the more visibility, the better, obviously, that it deserves. So I've always known about the case, of course. And for me, it could have been me. I mean, it could have been any of us, that in his shoe, in Matthew Shepard's shoes. So, for me, it's very personal. The fact that they weren't able to use that defense is a good thing. Obviously, they should be behind bars forever. I mean, I don't like. I believe, were they teenagers when they offended? Because there's this whole, of course, you're a juvenile and whatever. For me, it's the severity of the crime. I mean, you can be 17 years old. You know what you're doing. When I was 17 years old, I knew that murder was wrong. Like I wouldn't,
Exactly.
you have to look at I think you have to look at the crime as an individual entity thing when you're doling out the sentences. And, this whole thing where they're a juvenile and they shouldn't be judged as harshly, I think is at some point, and in some cases is ridiculous, but it's probably in another podcast. Um, So I'm glad that they were able to receive that punishment. I'm just shocked that moving forward, because that was a while ago, and moving forward, there have been other cases. And perhaps it's because trans is kind of new to the zeitgeist and people are still trying to wrap their heads around what a trans person is. But now it seems to be falling on them to be receiving you know, the trans panic defense, is something that is almost more. I feel like people are like, well, yeah, he was tricked into thinking it was a woman, but it wasn't. How is that?
Right.
How does she deserve to be murdered?
Exactly, exactly. And one case of this was Islane Nettles, who was murdered in August of 2013 at the hands of James Dixon. And he used the defense because they were friends and he was attracted to her.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone told him, of course, in a derogatory way, that Nestles was a trans woman. And he pushed her and she fell, smashed her head against the curb, and he used the defense, and his sentence actually got reduced from 17 years to 12 years, and people expect him to be out in 6 to 8 years for that. Um, and this was not that long ago.
No,
2013 was not that long ago. People were definitely aware of the LGBTQ community, and the fact that these defenses were and still are working is definitely a detriment to any type of justice a victim is going to get.
I think, and a few other things about that case. It's like, well, first of all, like Dell, this was in New York State too, right? This is in New York City.
Yes.
Was it Brooklyn or something? Like New
Yeah.
York City, this is one of the most diverse places in the U.S. I mean, if that can happen there, imagine what can happen in Iowa, or Utah or Montana or something. I mean, just New York City, and this is the sentence this man is getting for something like that. And like you said, it just happened basically yesterday. Like this is not that long ago. I did read also that he was like hitting on her or sort of like approaching, which again, a cisgendered man, like accosting some woman,
Yep.
she was probably minding her business, but anyway, and then got roped into his business. And then his friends were basically making fun of him because, it comes out that she's a transgendered woman. So what is it? His ego gets hurt,
Hmm.
right? And
Right.
so she dies because his ego is bruised.
And his transphobia ego at
Yeah.
that, because it was, oh, you're gay now. Oh, you're attracted to this man now. Well, he wasn't attracted to a man. He wasn't hitting on a man. He
No,
wasn't flirting with a man.
no.
He was hitting on, attracted to, and flirting with a woman.
Yeah.
And the fact that
Really an
you
attractive
disagree with
woman.
that, right, is
Yeah.
someone that was definitely your taste.
Yeah.
And this is not the first time where it's someone's friends or family's reaction that causes them
Mm.
to then lash out, which causes them to be violent. I remember the case of Scott Amador. It was the same thing where he was murdered because Jonathan Smith was afraid of what his family would think about a gay man being attracted to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, and he used the defense, and he was sentenced to a second degree murder instead of first degree. And the last update I saw was that he was released from prison. And this murder happened in 1998. So it's like, what? Like, why would you think, okay, I need to kill someone to preserve what my family thinks of me? Like, your family would rather you be a murderer
Yeah.
than like homosexual
Yeah.
or bisexual or transgender or attracted to a transgender.
Mhm.
Like, what does that say about your friends and family? Really?
Yeah. Maybe you need to get some new friends also. I mean, the fact that this guy could be out for killing Islam Nettles, like you murdered someone, right? Like you murdered someone. In any other situation, you would get life in prison or the death penalty, depending on the state.
Right.
I mean, and you're going to get out? What message is that sending to everyone else? That it's basically okay and that you were kind of within your rights to do that, you know?
Exactly. And it also stokes fear in the community,
Yeah.
because if people are going to be deterred from crime because of what could happen to them in the criminal justice system, but then they see, oh, actually, even if I go through the criminal justice system for attacking a member of the LGBTQ community, nothing bad is going to happen to me. I might need to spend some time in jail, but at least I'll maintain my manhood or whatever
Right. I'm still a
that
man.
means
I'm
to
still a
them.
man. Yeah.
It's like, okay, yeah, I can just attack them. I can do 5 years in jail. That's
Yeah.
the calculations people are now making. Am I okay with doing 5 years in jail?
Well,
And unfortunately,
I rather do 5 years in jail than people think that I might be attracted to a trans woman.
right, right. And that puts a target on trans women's backs. They are still more likely to be general victims of crime, still more likely to experience things like homelessness, food insecurity, job insecurity, housing insecurity. all of that, they're still more likely, and that puts them at even greater risk of crime. And then you tie in the fact that a lot of them have to resort to sex work, another factor that increases their likelihood to be victims of crime.
Yeah.
And then you have this thing where someone, even if they are seeking it out, they are, it's still, well, she was trans. She was trans. She should have known what was happening.
Yeah.
5 years, slap on the wrist. We're fine. We're gonna move on. And it's
And,
it's a really sad situation.
and then, of course, like everything else, what's the color of your skin? Because that's going to also dictate how far down the ladder or how little we care about the victim. Do you know? So it's sad. I did an episode for my patrons, and it was a hate crime. So of course it was difficult, and it was a trans woman, and she was basically abused by this man, or she was not abused. She was completely attacked. She ended up in the hospital. She almost died. So they had met. Long story short, they had met. He found her very attractive. He was hitting on her, as cisgender men, feel like it's their prerogative to do with women anytime, any place. So he did that. Of course, she was very flattered, because who doesn't like to feel attractive and wanted? And so they made a date to meet at a motel. She tried to tell him, she's like, I have something to tell you. And he said, I don't care what it is. I think you're so attractive. Let's just meet, blah, blah, blah. So they meet and they start drinking, and she's like, I have to tell you something. I have to tell you something. And he kept pushing and pushing on her. And then he started to kiss her and stuff. And then she's just like, stop, just stop. I have to tell you something. And finally, when she told him, she ends up in the hospital, right? She's fighting for her life. She almost dies. And she goes to the authorities. And at first they're like, oh, it looks like, we got the guy. He's very guilty. He stole your cell phone. He deleted all your texts. So he's obviously guilty. He's guilty. Like, there's no question. But by the time she gets out of the hospital, she starts not hearing from police. She starts not hearing back from investigators. And it goes from this guy's going away for life, or whatever, 20 plus years, to now she's not hearing from the investigators and stuff. And now she has to go to them and be like, well, what's happening? What's happening? And it turns out he's using the trans panic defense in court. And so it goes down, and it just keeps going from like 15 years, 10 years, 8 years. And it looks like he may not even spend any time in prison at all. He's going to do some probation and stuff like that. And it's just, of course, she's an undocumented Mexican. Right? So had she been, it's just, which makes it worse for her, because they're like, well, she's undocumented, and she's not from this country and all this stuff. And it's just so disgusting. She's a human being. Exactly. She's a human being. P.S. that came to your country for a better life. There's a reason she's there. She's not just there because she's a criminal. She actually had a full-time job. She was a manager at a fast food restaurant. She's contributing. She wants to contribute to the society. And then they use that against her for coming there, for seeking a better life, so that, this guy can get off. Because obviously, whatever. Is he white? No, I think he was, anyway. He's an American, is the point, right? So she obviously falls way down the ladder there. It was just a terrible story, and she'll just never see justice for that. And that's just one story, right, of many.
Yeah, unfortunately, it seems, and people pretend not to understand intersectionality, but this is when it really comes up. When you look at, okay, well, you can say that he's not a white male, but compare his privilege and his status to that of his victim.
Yeah.
He's an American. She's undocumented. He's a man. She's a woman. You have those factors that go into that, and you have to look at all the facets of someone's personality that puts them at risk for being victimized. and puts them at risk for their victimization to not receive the same amount of care and consideration that another victim may receive. So I do wonder, what would that look like if it was a cisgendered white woman
Oh,
that was accosted in a hotel by a Mexican American man?
oh no. Come on. Oh my God. Can you imagine the media storm? And then never mind. Let's say she's blonde and
Oh,
kind of pretty, let's say. I mean,
yes.
just and from a good family, let's say. I
Good home.
mean,
Yep. Small town.
I just yeah, it's the worst of the worst. I just released the my Pride podcast, my Pride Edition podcast, and I'm talking about Stonewall and the Stonewall uprising, which is obviously integral to like what Pride means for us today, because it kind of launched 1,000 ships of prides around the world and the parades and things, and Marsha P. Johnson, who was a trans woman at the time, and her life cut short in some mysterious way where she ends up floating in the Hudson River. And we just don't have answers to this day. It's just a cold case. It's basically people have their theories that she was, maybe it was the police, maybe it was the mob because she was very outspoken and the mob were controlling the gay bars at the time. She did have mental health issues, but she wasn't suicidal. It's just a mess, and she just never got what she deserved, in terms of an investigation or the police giving a shit, you know.
Yeah, I exactly agree with you. We covered that case last season, and I wasn't too familiar with her. I had heard of Stonewall, but not, too familiar with the organizers of it. And so, as I was digging deeper into her story and everything that she overcame and everything that she put into making sure that the people that were basically in her shoes as well had what they needed.
Yeah,
Um, and then she dies, and like you said, it seems like no one cares.
yeah,
It seems like it was just her community that cared, and anyone that could have done anything about it was just like she was a drug addict, she was mentally ill, and she killed herself.
yeah.
And this is how she did it
If,
with no
like you
evidence.
said, if a cisgendered white woman was found floating in the Hudson River, I mean, the investigation what that would happen is just
And
you can't compare.
not at all. And, as we talk about the media has a big influence on how these stories are covered because a lot of times they spend a lot of their focus on the sexuality of the victim. They say things like, well, was he promiscuous?
Yeah.
What was he doing in that gay bar?
Hmm.
How many partners had he had in the past?
Yeah.
How aggressive was he being with his sexual appetite? You don't do that with any other victims.
Hmm.
And it's basically victim blaming, which then turns into these defendants being able to use the defense because basically they're like, well, yeah, of course I had to defend myself. Of course I, had no other recourse, like, walking away. But I just had to attack this person. Just look at how they're describing the victim.
Yeah. And it's the same that they do again with cisgendered women, Oh, what was she doing by herself on that street? Why was she wearing such a short skirt? Why was she why did she buy that man a drink? Like, give a girl a break. You know what I mean? Like, you can't do anything without being, responsible for your own fate. And so it's the same. It's the same. It trickles down, to the gay community and the trans community even more. It's kind of like who don't have the opportunities that other people have, so they have to turn to survival sex and sex work, just to make it through. And then they're blamed for being in that position, which is just, you put them there in that position, give them opportunities to get employment in places so that they can support themselves. They don't want to be sex workers. I mean, some people enjoy sex work. I'm not, and it's nothing against sex work at all. Um, but yeah, you know what I mean? Like if they had a choice, maybe they would have chosen differently and not been in high risk situations like that. So yeah, it's so easy to blame when actually you've created a system that is making it difficult for them to survive. And now you're blaming them for they're not even making the choice. They don't have a choice. They have to do certain things to survive. And then they get blamed for ending up dead. Oh, or attacked. I mean,
Right. And then, people try to put blinders on as if they don't see the root causes of the problem. You have states currently that don't have um, anti discrimination bills that are focused on the LGBTQ community. They can be kicked out of apartments, they can be fired at will simply because of who they are.
yeah,
And so the fact that we live in a country that has those type of laws, of course, it's going to trickle down to how the community treats people. Um, some people try to look at, how is politics connected to culture? They're all interlinked. There is not this separation that people like to have in their mind. If a politician is pushing a certain bill, the culture is going to absorb the results of that bill. And you see it all over when it comes to whether victims of hate crimes actually get the justice that they need. We're going to talk about one case where, unfortunately, the person did not get any justice whatsoever. So, according to testimony at the trial, in the early morning hours of March 5th, 2008, Terrence Hauser had invited Joseph Beardeman back to his apartment for drinks because they were at a bar and Beardeman couldn't get any drinks anymore. And they hadn't met before, but they both lived in the same apartment complex. At Hauser's house, Beardeman claims that they talked about sports. Keep in mind that this is all coming from Beardeman. It's only one side of the story,
mm,
because he claims that moments later, Hauser wanted to watch child pornography, but then said that he was just joking. Beardeman then said that he just passed out on the couch, and when he woke up, he saw Hauser with a 14-inch sword, and Hauser was threatening to sexually assault him. Beardeman then stabbed Hauser 61 times, claiming that he was defending himself. I'm going to repeat that.
yeah.
He stabbed him 61 times,
hmm
claiming to defend himself.
hmm
He was acquitted of first-degree murder.
And without getting the other side at all.
Yeah, so unfortunately, this came out at trial, so we do not know what actually happened from Hauser's perspective at all. And it seems like every statement was made to make Beardeman look like a victim in this.
Yeah. How can you come to a conclusion about anything when you don't have the other side of the story, especially in something like this? There's no witnesses. There's nothing. I mean, you can just make up whatever you want and just color the other person however you want to your benefit.
Exactly. And I think this is probably the most clear-cut case of the victim is not able to speak because the victim is deceased now.
Yeah.
And so the perpetrator is able to spin whatever story they want in order to make themselves look good. And unfortunately, in this case, it worked.
Yeah.
How, just even if we take out the gay panic defense, just set that to the side
Yeah.
for one moment. How do you get away with murdering someone by stabbing them 61 times?
Yeah.
How do we claim that that's self-defense?
Yeah. Because self-defense is just, I'm going to incapacitate you or move you out of the way or get out of the way, get out of the space, just enough so that I can get away. It's not 61 times that's a passion. There's passion there. There's fury, there's anger. It's not just self-defense.
Right. And I'm just like, what now, bringing the gay panic defense
Yeah.
back in,
Yeah.
I think that's really the only thing that explains it.
Yeah.
The juries were able to say, well, he was gay, you know, what we don't know what type of energy and veracity he was coming with. But of course, the medical examiner testified that after the 10th to 13th blow, he was dead.
Yeah. And he knew that.
Of course.
Yeah.
So I just, it's so weird.
It sounds like homophobia. And, we'll never know what happened, obviously. Ugh.
Right, exactly. And yeah, like you said, we only got one side of the story. And so I am not going to sit here and listen to a murderer's account of events and believe that that is what actually happened.
Yeah.
That's not something that we're going to do.
I think,
Um,
I feel like the whole gay panic defense is just, it's men who feel they've lost control of the situation. They feel like they're not in control, and they're so used to being in control. Women are so used to not being in control, and men are always in control of situations. I mean, in terms of physically, or just they have the upper hand. They just do. So women have had to try to work around that, and so I love that about women. They've had to get crafty and sort of like. So I love that. But it's just a cisgendered man, especially white men, live in a world where they're always in control. They have the final say. They have the upper hand. So I think when they feel that a gay man is coming at them, they feel suddenly, coming at them, maybe complimenting them, sending them a drink. Anyway, they feel out of control, and they're not used to that. They're not used to feeling that. So that's where this whole like anger comes out of, and then they just start, going at it. And then now we've got this defense, which is completely ludicrous. It's ridiculous.
it is. And the last case um, that I wanted to talk about is Daniel Spencer, a guitarist, invited another musician, James Miller, to his Austin apartment to play music together. Later that night, Miller stabbed Spencer 4 times, killing him. Miller then cleaned Spencer's apartment, went back to his own home, changed his clothes, and contacted the police to confess. There was no physical evidence to suggest an attempted sexual assault happened, but Spencer's attorneys argued that Miller's that since Miller had never been in trouble with the police before, the only thing that could explain why he committed murder was because Spencer tried to sexually assault him. Again, blaming the victim. And the jury convicted Miller of criminally negligent homicide, the lowest grade of felony in Texas. And he was sentenced to only 6 months in jail and 10 years of probation.
Was that his defense? Was the gay panic defense?
Yeah. He said that he was attempted sexual assault was going to happen to him. And even though there was no evidence, why else would his client kill someone? Unless it was that that person was trying to sexually assault him.
I love that we can just throw that out now as like a sort of a blanket, anytime somebody commits a crime and, well, why else would that? Well, obviously this guy was trying to sexually assault him. Even if he was coming on to him, who has the right to kill somebody because of that? You say no, and then you ask them to leave, right?
That's what rational people would do.
Sorry,
That's
I'm thinking
definitely
like a
what I
rational
would.
person. You're right, Del. What was I thinking? I mean, and then to have that as your defense, and then be basically rewarded for that defense. Saying, yeah, you're right, actually, you shouldn't have murdered them, but, you kind of had a reason to. I get it, so I'm going to give you less time. No.
Yeah, and like way less time. Like we talked about with the Nestles case, that was a 5-year
Oh,
reduction, probably going to be more like a 10-year when he serves time. But this was you stab someone 4 times, kill them, and you're only going to be in jail for 6 months in Texas. Texas is not a state that is soft on crime, so
No,
to
they like
speak,
to punish
or
people. Yeah.
they love it.
Yeah.
So, it
Yeah.
starts to make me think, why is this case different? Why is
Well,
this case different for Texas?
the case I spoke about earlier that I covered for my patrons was for Aaliyah Hernandez was her name, also in Texas. So obviously in Texas, I mean, they're like, it's gay, trans. They're like, well, very Republican. Well, Ted Cruz. I mean, with Ted Cruz at that, oh God, it's just a mess. Anyway, we won't get into politics.
Not yet.
No.
Not on this episode, but we might need to connect again for that one.
Yeah, we should. Because, boy.
So, after thinking about all these cases and the one you shared, and just the overall totality of the use of this defense, what effect do you think that it has had on the LGBT community?
Oh boy. Yeah, the police and obviously the community have such a hard checkered past. I mean, we spoke about Marsha P. Johnson and we spoke about Stonewall. I mean, the reason Stonewall happened was because the police were going in there and raiding the place and taking it over. And, they don't want, the only reason Stonewall even existed was because the mafia owned the bar and they were paying the cops to allow them to keep it open because they were making good money off of gay people. They needed someplace to go. They need somewhere to go. And so, mafia members were like, oh, I see an opportunity here. Let's make a bar for gay people. But the cops were like, when they stopped getting the bribes from the mafia, they're like, well, we don't want gay people to have any rights or a place to go. We're going to go shut this place down. So the police and the queer community have a really checkered past. More recently in Toronto, a few years ago, Black Lives Matter stopped the Pride Parade because they were like, look, guys, this is a thing. We need to pay attention. And then the queer community was like, was brought more to a realization of what the situation is like. So the cops don't even march in our parades anymore. COVID aside, when we have our parades, the cops aren't even invited into our parade. That's how bad it is. Until we come to some kind of understanding and this is in Canada and it's the US. Well, I'm not talking about Minnesota. I'm not talking about, Floyd. I'm not talking about, this is in Canada. So, imagine in other parts of the US and in Canada where it's even more segregated. But I was going to mention about, we had a huge case here a few years ago of Bruce MacArthur, who was a serial killer who was killing gay men in the Toronto area, in the gay village here. And it got so much bad press because he had killed for so long and he was able to kill so many people that, I mean, not Jeffrey Dahmer style, but just like enough people where it was like the only way that he was able to get away with it for so long was because his victims were POC, people of color, and also they were gay. So the cops were just like, not that they weren't interested, but there was just not the same push. If there were white women from an affluent neighborhood going missing, I mean, the media coverage and everything would have been intense. So there is a precedent set where the gay community isn't as important, the trans community even less important on the police's, scope of their hierarchy of what they're going to investigate. And that case really brought it to light because he was able to kill so many people for so long because the police weren't doing their jobs as well. So that was just another sort of splitting of the community away from the police. So we had bathhouse raids here in the 80s where police were going into bathhouses and just arresting people. And so, it's not that we don't want to heal because obviously we need each other. We need the police to protect us. We want the police to protect us. But at the same time, historically speaking, they haven't been there for us. So there's just this ongoing conversation and struggle between the community and the police. At least I can speak to in Toronto. It's not. There's work to be done for sure. Yeah.
And speaking of work to be done, do you think either in Canada or the United States that there will ever be a federal anti gay and trans panic defense law like some states have?
Ooh. You mean federally, where anywhere they will be able to use that defense in court? Oh God, Del. I hope not. I hope not. I am an eternal optimist. I mean, I love crime and I love to talk about things that are morbid and kind of dark. But I am an eternal optimist. I always see through rose-colored glasses, and it's one step forward, two steps back. A lot of times. But I don't think so. I don't think so. I think, and I'll speak to. I mean, I'm watching a lot U.S. politics these days because it's so polarizing. So it's very drama filled and kind of like a soap opera. But I know it's real life for a lot of people. So, and it affects us up here as well because whatever you do affects us. So I'm watching and I see such a divide between the country, and it's just so on one side, yes, I would say if one side in particular did get control, they absolutely would make it a federal thing if they could. But the other side is so not that. I mean, it's just such a difference. And so I don't think so. I think it would stay a very localized defense to use in very localized areas and in states that are very, very right-wing Republican states. And in Canada, it's not a thing. It won't be a thing. So luckily.
Yes. This is not the only issue that Canada seems to outpace America with actually doing the right thing. And so before we leave you, I'm going to give Patrick an opportunity to share where can we find you across the internet? Where's the best place to support the work that you do?
Oh, thank you. So my podcast is True Gay Crime. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. I also have a YouTube channel under my name, which is not about true crime, actually, but I did start it during the beginning of the pandemic, also when I had time, and I've been wanting to do a YouTube video channel for a long time. So if you just search my name, Patrick Morano, on YouTube, you'll see it. There's a lot. I mean, it's gay content. It talks a lot about relationships. There's a lot of living your best life kind of stuff, but it's very fun. It's very light. There's always a takeaway at the end of the videos. So I'm really proud of it. So if you want to check that out, you can. Of course, I'm on Instagram. It's just patrick.morano. You can find it. It's very easy. And on Facebook as well. So.
All right, well, guys, make sure you follow him. Make sure you subscribe. That's where we're going to leave you. Thank you again, Patrick, for sitting down and talking with me through these really, really crazy topics about people who definitely need to be under the jail.
It deserves more discussion for sure, and I super appreciate you having me on your show. Thank you so much, Del, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Look out for part 2.
Yes.
Bye, guys.